Hello, my name is Clara Mavelli and I set up the Cultural Entrepreneurship Institute here in Berlin. Today my guest is Ria Thomas, a cybersecurity expert from London. Hi Ria, nice that you are here. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you, Clara, first of all, for the invitation and the opportunity to speak with you today. My name is Ria Thomas, as you know. I'm the global co-lead for cybersecurity for a company called Brunswick Group. But my career actually started out very differently. It wasn't focused on cyber. I'm actually licensed as an attorney in the US, but I spent the first decade of my career with the US government, and I was focusing on security, I was focusing on risk. But 10 years ago, when I left, the very concept of cybersecurity was new in the business world. It was very much focused on technical issues and what governments were looking at. And I came into it at that point in time and have been really having a journey that has changed and evolved along with the way that the industries have been looking at this issue.
Can you give us just a couple of aspects
Yeah.
in this changing world?
Sure. So one thing, as I mentioned, when I initially started out 10 years ago, the whole focus around cybersecurity was about the technical risks and the technical issues. And it was very much about how governments were coming to grips with it. For companies as well, over the last, I would say, 7, 8 years, the focus had been on the technical risks and the technical investments that needed to be made to help prevent them from coming under a potential cyber attack. I would say it's in the last 5 years or so that the discussion started to shift, and more so in the last 2 to 3 years, that it stopped being just about the technical issues and more about the people side, more about the decisions that human beings are making, more about the human beings who are on the other side in terms of the attack itself, who are impacting the business, and more about the human beings who are being impacted when an attack happens. That shift, I would say, as I mentioned, is in the last 2 to 3 years in particular, I've seen it, where now it's a discussion at the boardroom level, but it's also a discussion that we see in our newspapers every single day. It's becoming more of a real-life, everyday human issue, and that's a massive shift from even a decade ago.
And what do you like about being a cybersecurity expert, actually?
So I think when people hear the word cybersecurity, they don't necessarily always know what that means, and there is an assumption that this must be very complicated and it must be a technical issue alone. It is. At its heart, it is about the use of technology. It is about the digitalization of our world and the risks that are inherent in it. But, as I mentioned, in the evolution of what these risks are, what it's also become about is how organizations are preparing or how they respond. And when I say organizations, I'm actually talking about people. And the people who are capable and who have the capability, the capacity, if you will, to be able to respond to a crisis like one they've never seen before. And what I enjoy about it, where my expertise in cybersecurity comes in, is to be able to take a look at the risks from a human perspective, to be able to say, what is it about the human beings on the other side in terms of what they are trying to achieve when they attack a business? Why is it that they're interested in a particular business? And when that business takes a look at itself, to be able to say, are we prepared as human beings, from the leadership to the board of a company, all the way down to the crisis management and the people who are actually dealing with customers? How are we coming together as one? And that part, I find, is the most difficult, because in most organizations, they're very siloed. And that's a human piece. Every company I walk into, everyone always says, yeah, it's a bit difficult to get things done. Very rarely do you find a company, especially a large global one, that has every element of its business unit knowing and understanding how to work together across a common issue. And what we've found in a cyber crisis, what I found in particular, is how do you actually break the walls down? How do you get people to understand that it's their issue, that their problem, their concern as well as their colleagues? And how do you then bring them together to understand what everybody's roles and responsibilities are? That's what I really enjoy about working in this space, is how do you actually break down those walls and help people work together to face a common issue, a common threat.
Is it like that still the IT department in a company are the jigs that are working on their own? No one really understands what they do.
I think until an attack happens in many companies, and this is shifting, so I don't want to make a huge generalization, but in many companies there is still an assumption that this is something that our cyber and our IT teams are responsible for until the attack happens. And then when it happens, the impact of it, whether it's the emails being down, the phones being down, the data servers being down, so people can't do their normal jobs, whether it's the customers calling, whether it's the partners coming in, whether it's in the case of listed companies, shareholders who are concerned about what's happening, whether it's the general public, then all of a sudden it stops being about the cyber and IT issue. It becomes very much about the human beings, everybody else in the organization, that need to understand what this impact is, and then how do we respond as one. And that piece of it is what makes it very different than other things.
So the vulnerability is always by a person, like someone opening an email shouldn't have opened, or
not always.
No,
I mean, that sadly the statistics show that a vast majority of these attacks are successful because someone clicked on a link that they weren't supposed to do. It was because of a human behavior piece. However, there are issues that are related to the technology itself, right? If there is a flaw, for lack of a better word, or a loophole, and I'm using purposefully words that are not technical, but to say that that's what's getting exploited, or it'd be like a burglar trying to come into your home and realizing that that particular lock isn't working. It's not because you left the window open, it's because they were able to break that particular lock. So it's not always about human behavior, but the vast majority of time it is. And more importantly, the response and how in that moment of a heated crisis, how people respond, that is really what it's become about.
So then, if we go back to your position, how complex is it?
I found it to be extremely complex in terms of people not understanding how to work together and what roles and responsibilities are. But in terms of the solution, it's not that complex. It's really about people understanding what their roles and responsibilities are and what they can expect from each other and how it is that they would need to work together. So if that piece of it can be worked out, if that piece of it can be embedded into the muscle memory of an organization, that makes it a smooth process when something happens. But to get there, it's even acknowledging that that's even an issue that needs to be addressed. And that, to me, is some of the complexities of this issue. So I'm leaving aside all of the technical piece, and I'm just saying, let's look at the organizational risk, let's look at the organizational resilience, and that comes down to people.
Yeah, so can you describe us, if someone wants to follow your position or to do something similar, someone of our user, how is your day, or just 1 week?
I wish I could tell you it's the same every day or it's the same week to week, but that's what I love about the job, is it's not the same week to week or day to day. My primary role is really to work with the teams that we have across multiple geographies, and to help the companies that are our clients or potential clients understand these risks. And that's everything from working with them to understand what makes them vulnerable, not from a technical perspective, but from a business perspective, and then helping them to understand what solutions they need to put into place. So it's very much like a management consultant piece, but you're part psychologist, you're part social worker, you're part strategist, you're building across multiple skills that are softer than purely hard skills that might need to come in.
Yeah, so I can imagine that this is actually a position that is better covered by a woman, actually, with all this combination of skills that you mentioned.
I don't know, but I will say this. I think that I find it surprising when I see how few women are entering the world of cybersecurity. And I think because there is this connotation that it is a very technical, male-dominated world. And personally, as a woman who works in this space, and as a woman who's worked in other spaces that are stereotypically balanced in one way or another when it comes to gender, I think it's about creating one's own voice and understanding one's own expertise. And if your skills are one that are needed or not needed, but you can shape, then I really do think we have an opportunity. So what do I mean by that? What I mean by that is no one said to me, you should do cybersecurity and organizational resilience, and you should help companies understand what these risks are. What I realized was that there is a need that companies themselves may not have identified, and how it is that people like myself who have a background in these types of issues, or who have skills the way you just described it, how is it that that can be brought to as an expertise to the people who need it most? That to me has been regardless of gender. We shouldn't let a gender issue stop us. because we ourselves are very much capable of being a part of the solution as well.
Oh. And now we talk about something that everyone is talking about. In this case is, of course, AI.
Yeah.
What application has AI in cybersecurity nowadays?
Yeah, I mean, I think AI is, of course, yes, like you said, it's on every panel you go to. There's someone speaking about AI. I think AI is as many people have described before me. You know, it is the future. It is where we are progressing as human beings, if you will. And there are, to me, inherent risks and benefits to that, and from a cyber perspective in particular. The more technology dependent we are, the more digital we are, the more we are potentially vulnerable then to what could be exploited from those types of technologies. At the same time, to me, then the solutions are very similar. It's understanding what those risks are and putting into place potential measures that allow us to understand the risks, but also to mitigate it. So to me, I think AI is very much a natural evolution of human beings and our progress, if you will, in terms of as a society. And I don't think that AI necessarily is a negative in the space of cybersecurity, but I think that it is important to understand that cybersecurity, meaning the security of the systems and networks that are in place, is very much taken into consideration when one looks at AI technology as well. And it is. I mean, that is something definitely that developers of AI are looking at as well, or should become aware of.
Yeah, if we talk about an AI that is beneficial to humanity, and thinking about surveillance, for example, yesterday San Francisco banned facial recognition as a kind of abuse of technology, and this is something very important, that you can also say no to some new development. You don't have to take everything.
Yeah. I actually, there's a quote of mine that I'm probably going to misquote who said it, but this was when the telegraph was first brought to the United States, and there is this message that was sent as the first message on a telegraph from the East Coast to the West Coast. It was sent in Morse code, and they had used, I want to say it was a quote by Alexander Graham Bell. Please forgive me for this, but what I loved about the quote was, when it was decoded at the other end, what it said was, "What hath God wrought?" And I love that idea, that in that moment when they realized that they were going to connect faster than they ever had, they stopped and thought, what does this mean? Where are we going with this? What is the implication of this? And they actually took it aside from, I mean, it's not for me about the spiritual piece as much as the philosophical piece around what exactly are we building and where have we come to in our moment in history. I don't always find that at this moment in history we take the time to stop and go, with this new technology, with this new advancement, what are we bringing about? What is it that's going to change our society? I'm not sure there's enough conversation. I think there are conversations in certain circles about AI and what is happening, or new technologies, about whether it's facial recognition or others, but I don't hear that enough in your common everyday discussions. It's not everyday discussions that if you are not part of a certain group of people focused on it, that others are having, and it should be, because it is changing our society very fast.
There is something that not everyone is talking about in this field, but would be interesting about, everyone is talking about hackers, because because they have, this way of life. They use their power and their money with, big cars, or this kind of Rolex, or this kind of status stuff. And that's why they are also caught, actually, usually. But there are also hackers, so-called ethical hackers, and also there are the malicious insider, the one that are, from your own company.
I think ethical hackers have, I've worked with a wide range of them in over the course. What they're trying to do is work on behalf of those individuals, those companies that need to understand how vulnerable they are from a technical perspective. And they're using those skills that could potentially be used for for negative reasons, for positive reasons, which is to help understand how do you actually assess what your vulnerabilities are. They are doing a positive good for society. So to assume that every hacker is a malicious actor, is wrong. There are plenty that are using those very skills to help shore up defenses and to make sure that there is an amount of protection that's being built in. In terms of malicious insiders, that's a different issue, but it's a different type of threat, right? So you've got your hackers who are coming in from outside of an organization, but then you have those that are already within. The vast majority, I would say I've supported a number of live cyber responses in the last 8 months or so. And there was a significant amount that were because of people from the inside, meaning employees who were disgruntled for various reasons, who were either out of greed or because they wanted to make money for their own motivations, or because they felt that they were passed over or they were having personal problems. But most of the time it was because they did not feel connected to that organization. And organizations have an emotional reaction when they find out it's one of their own, because it's very hard to be betrayed by one of your own. And the motivations for that aside, it's then how do you even deal with that individual as one piece of it, because it is about more than dealing with a hacker. It's about one of your employees, and you have a whole HR process. Do you call law enforcement? There's a whole other set of discussions and decisions that need to be had. But then just as important, it's the perception of you as an organization from others. So what do I mean? One of your employees has stolen data, information that your company had that was business sensitive or was personal information of customers, of clients. Then there's an assumption on the part externally that maybe you should have done something even more to prevent this. Did you notice any erratic behavior in this particular individual? It's similar to when someone commits a workplace violence issue. You know, what was it that you should have seen that could have potentially prevented it? And just as important, was there anything that, even if you hadn't seen it, in terms of their behavior, that you could have done to stop it, to prevent it? So, and from a technical point of view in cyber, you know, how did this person still have access? You know, why did they have such privileges? That piece of it is also something that companies then have to deal with as well. So an insider, an employee in particular, is someone that is an issue when it comes to a cyber attack that's even more complex for many companies than if somebody external has done something.
Oh, this is really interesting. But if we stay on a corporation, for example, nowadays, as we said, we are in this phase of transformation.
Yes.
And it could be very good for a company not to stop at a compliance level. This is nowadays good, but quite normal, but to go a step beyond in the direction governance and care more for, if you care more for your employees, for your customers, for the planet, this is something that is on the long run is also going to give you some commercial revenues. How do you see this?
Absolutely. I think more and more businesses, organizations are realizing that it's not that value that you create is not just about doing whatever the service is that you're selling, but rather about the broader place in society and how you're perceived and how you're viewed. And for me, that comes down to reputation. And reputation can be defined in so many different ways, but the way I tend to define it is the perception of what you have done with the trust that's been placed in you. Whether it's from your shareholders, whether it's from customers, whether it's from the general public. It's how are you being perceived in terms of your actions, your behavior, your place in society. And businesses are realizing that. And even when it comes to cybersecurity, that is where I've now seen the evolution, is everyone saying, oh, wait a minute, this isn't just about us protecting data. This isn't just about us responding in a way that seems like we're responding to a regulation, but rather that we are humans and that we are responding to the impact on other human beings and that we understand our responsibility and that we take it seriously. So that's what I find very interesting, because when we started this conversation, we talked about how things have been evolving even over the last 10 years. To me, this new evolution is relatively new, this understanding that it's about the trust that's been placed in you and what it is that you need to do with it. How
is now 5Gs or IoT IoT, how are they impacting cybersecurity?
So I think with every new step and wave of new technology, I don't think the whole question around cybersecurity, is that going to go away? I don't think so. I mean, I think we have become more and more connected, as many people before me have said. We are becoming more networked. We are becoming more dependent on not just on each other, but on technologies. And as that happens, there is going to be a balance that needs to be struck between innovation and security. And sometimes the two are not always compatible, because in the race to go to market, security is not always necessarily built in. So to me, cybersecurity is something that needs to be underpinning all of these new waves of technology. And I think that is the focus that the companies that are developing these technologies are seeking to do as well, because ultimately they are going to be held responsible, God forbid, if something were to happen because of an implicit or an inherent weakness or vulnerability in those technologies.
But nowadays there is not a real division anymore between cyberspace and real life. There is someone calling it on life. So now I will take the position of a consumer, and 5G is Huawei, there is very much going on now. I don't need to go on details. Yeah. But if you don't want to support something that is not clear, that is only beneficial for everyone, is there an alternative, or is this a kind of monopoly?
At this point, those alternatives are being looked at, and I think that is the point that certain governments are making, is saying, let's not look at this as a one company solution, but as what are the other alternatives that we can take a look at in order to be able to provide the type of technologies that the average person can depend on, while at the same time protecting broader national security issues. It really comes down to whether or not one believes what those governments are saying or not. That is not up to me as an individual, perhaps, but up to the businesses and to the governments themselves. But ultimately, to me, there will be other solutions. I mean, if we've seen anything in any technology, is how quickly competitors catch up, and how quickly that it's not just a solution dependent on one particular company. To me, this is a discussion that has multiple dimensions to it: national security, broader geopolitical issues, and ultimately where that discussion leads to is hopefully to alternatives that will continue the build out of the 5G network, and for the rest of us to be able to use and have the benefits of it without some of the security risks that apparently may exist if one uses one particular technology from one particular company.
So talking about regulations,
yeah.
Europe was actually a first mover in this situation,
yeah.
now in this transformation,
yeah.
and started with the GDPR, this
yeah.
General Data Protection Regulation, last year, and now they are already thinking at a second edition.
Yeah.
If you had a wish, what would you like to see in this new edition?
I think a little bit more clarity. And that's easy for me to say, having not been the person who's part of the drafting of it. I realize, having worked on drafting things in the past, that sometimes it's all about compromise, and in the compromise language, the details might not be present. But in terms of how it's implemented, there has been confusion. And again, I'm not the only one to say that. Confusion both in terms of how governments are interpreting it, but also in terms of how companies feel they're being compliant with it. And fundamentally, for me, policy regulation comes down to changing behavior so that it is for the broader good, for the greater benefit. And oftentimes it's based on looking at something that we have seen has happened in the past that has not gone well, or something we see potentially happening in the future. Most of the time it's what's happened in the past. But to me, changing behavior isn't just saying to people, if you do this, this, and this, and this, and you comply with it, okay. It creates a minimum floor, but does it actually change and shift behavior? Does it change and shift society? To a certain extent, I think GDPR did that in terms of raising awareness, in terms of getting companies, as an example, to focus on this as an issue. But what I saw in reality is, especially after May 25 came and went, was more of a, okay, well, we've checked that box, I've got other things to do. And then if there is a breach, they come back and go, yeah, 72 hours, what do we need to do? As opposed to, how do we actually integrate this into our everyday thinking? It's getting there, but I think that maybe it's an evolution of how we get to it. Clarity helps, and maybe a little bit more, this is just my personal opinion, maybe a bit more understanding of the different pressures that companies face in addition to regulatory compliance.
You mentioned once in a talk, I listened, with your fantastic eloquence, I have to add, that we need also more transparency. For example, as a user, you have to tag, yes or no about, and this is about a very long license with so many articles and paragraphs, and you don't have time or possibility to really understand what's going on.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that every time I go to any website and they make me click on something saying I agree with their privacy policies, the ones that I really appreciate are the ones where they spell out exactly what it is that I am opting out of. And they ask me to opt in if I want to, have this be for marketing purposes, for example. But the vast majority of the time I go to it and it just says, do you agree with our privacy policies? And there's a link to a very long legalistic approach, which even with a legal background, I don't have the time to read or the specialization to sit there and parse out what each word means. So I click yes, I agree, because I actually want to read the article or I want to go to that particular website. Is that actually protecting me in terms of clicking it? Okay, that's because of a compliance issue. They did it, and I've done it because I want it for efficiency purposes. But is my data actually being protected? Do I actually really know what they're doing with it? No. And I'm someone who focuses on this as an issue. What about my mother? What about your average person on the street? Are they understanding what they're saying yes to? I guarantee you they're not. They're just doing it because they want to get to it. And the businesses are doing it because they need to do it. So somewhere along the way, we've missed that human understanding of what these issues really are and what it actually means.
Yeah, but people like an easy life, and actually we know we shouldn't give in to convenience, which technology does offer, and make a little more effort and inform ourselves what is fake news, what is correct information, and what is happening with our data. But actually what could happen now, because we know even young people, you have to protect them. So the very nice thing would be what we said at the beginning, that corporations take responsibility. And they are now starting. For example, just yesterday there was this Christchurch call for action. I just read it from that. Is Christchurch call to action to eliminate terrorist and violent content online. And actually Facebook, Microsoft, Twitter, Google and Amazon, they all committed to a plan to stop terrorist content and fight the hatred and extremism that lead to terrorist violence online. Because all this streaming that they made after Christchurch, or they are making in other situations, is of course impacting other people, or
part of the propaganda.
So it is really dangerous in that sense. So how do you see this? Is this gonna make a difference?
I do believe it will make a difference in terms of stopping some of this cycle where this kind of content then further creates a cycle of violence, where it further creates new propaganda for new, especially young people, vulnerable people, to absorb and feel like this is a part of the norm. For me, it's two things, right? That type of content, one, helps to create new jihadist cells, new individuals who are being radicalized. But in addition, it also, to a certain extent, desensitizes the rest of us that this is not normal, that this is not something that should be valued in any way. We've come to view social media and our expressions on social media as a validation of who we are as people. Yet it's being exploited in a way that is actually having a huge negative social impact. So I applaud companies that are willing to stand up and say, to the extent that we can, we will make an effort to monitor and take these down. Now, on the other hand, that might mean, to a certain extent, that it might be potentially areas where it could touch upon broader privacy issues. But I, for one, am willing to at least understand that some aspects of my privacy needs to be balanced with a broader need for security.
What about handing over personal data? How do you think, especially young people, could really work on that and understand that personal data are important? Privacy is actually a human right.
What we are commodities, for lack of a better word. In other words, someone is looking at it and saying, your interests, your needs, your wants, how do I actually exploit that to make money? That's one piece of it. The other piece of it is someone is taking a look at your social media profile and everything else that you are willingly, openly sharing about your interests, your passions, about the things that you have been doing, the things you're working on, and saying, how do I actually reach out to you and exploit that? So how do I actually send you an email that you will open? How do I send you a link that you will click because you think it's from someone you know, or it's about something you love? It's about a new concert that you would love to get tickets to, and someone's sending you a link where you can get, I don't know, free tickets, as an example. But they figured that out because of things that you have been willingly and openly sharing. That, to me, is a malicious actor trying to do that. Then, of course, there are companies that are also looking at this and thinking, how do I market better to you? This has been going on for years. It's not anything new. How do I market to you? How do I create a new product that you will like more? Do you want to be that product? Do you want to be that commodity? If you don't, then be aware of what you're putting out there, because that is going to be used as well. And personally, I prefer that I not be treated as a commodity.
So agency is actually the ability to solve problems, and nowadays agency and intelligence don't belong together anymore. So you can be a stupid intelligence, like a computer, that is even better in doing some calculations, and we should maybe use this agency, we humans, to do something more important, or to go deeper, be mindful, care more. How do you see this?
I think you mean in terms of the free agency that we have as human beings.
Yes, as human beings.
Yeah, I think that there's, to me, I find technology fascinating because with every advancement, we are solving issues and problems that we haven't, as a human society, we haven't been able to get to in the past. At the same time, we're becoming very dependent on technology, and we have forgotten that we have free will, that we have the ability to make decisions, that we are the ones, in fact, that are shaping this technology, not the other way around. But I will take myself as a personal example. Even a few years ago, I didn't have a smartphone, and I'm now looking back at those days fondly, because I now am surprised at how often I find myself not doing anything but just looking up random facts for no reason, other than because I don't know how to use my own imagination and sit still for a minute. And so I think to a certain extent I'm allowing technology to control me. But this is, I think in order to understand that, I think we need to take the time to step back and really understand how dependent are we. And I'm not sure that conversation is being had to the extent it should. The conversation about as much as technology benefits us as individuals, how are we becoming addicted? How are we becoming, in essence, driven by it? And I think when that becomes more of a normal conversation, perhaps then we can go back to talking about what exactly is the agency that we have to shape our destinies, to shape the technologies that we use. So it's not related to the AI piece, but it is related to the human piece, I will put it that way. It's really, because I focus on the business side, it's really helping companies to understand how they actually need to break through the human problems that they face when it comes to a technology-based issue like cyber. What do I mean? It means being able to say what is currently in place in most businesses is not enough to help them be resilient when it comes to issues, risks like a cyber attack. It's really about them understanding, how do we create a new structure? How do we restructure if it already exists? How we approach complex issues such as a cyber attack. So it's not just, in other words, I think we've talked about this once before, Clara, about who owns the risk when it comes to a cyber business risk. That in most companies is very splintered. And to me, where we are working on, or what I'm working on now, is really helping, especially large corporations, figure out how to put into place a governance structure around cyber that allows to bring together different parts of the organization to help understand the business risk, but also help understand how they best need to come together to respond.
There is something that the normal consumers could do, not only a corporation in this sense. So, and it's about passwords.
Yeah.
As we know, passwords are really very easy, so people are not really spending very much time on that. But this could be very helpful in order to prevent cyber attacks. How do you see this?
Sure, I think having strong passwords and not having using the same password in different places is very important. To your point earlier, Clara, I think every one of us wants an easy life and just wants to go and do what it is that we're trying to do. But what's really important to understand is that this is not a technical issue. This is not a machine on the other side. It's another human being. And a password is similar to a lock you might put on your door. You wouldn't leave your front door open, or you wouldn't put in a very simple lock that someone could just push and come in. You would actually try to put in additional measures to keep your home safe. This is, to me, the same behavior, change that needs to happen. So we need to understand those zeros, ones, whatever we're putting in, that password is actually helping to prevent a human being from taking something from us that's important and of value to us. But a password is only one thing. It's also understanding what it is that we're putting out about ourselves on social media. What is it that I'm saying, whether it's about my birthday, where I live, what my friends are, where I went to school, the name of my pet, my passions. How is that being used to write to me an email that sounds convincing, to write to me and send me a link that I will click on? It's those kinds of behavior and our place in society that really is getting exploited. So it's about understanding how we are at risk, but that it's within our control. Because cyber can seem very scary and I don't really understand it. It's not. It's about human beings that are trying to take something that don't belong to them. It is about us preventing that from happening.
And do you think is this only a phase that at a certain point will fade away with cyber attacks, or is gonna
I don't
continue?
Yeah, I don't. I mean, cyber is one of the latest evolutions of what a threat is. There was, I remember when terrorism and counterterrorism was very much a main focus. Still is, but it's not the way it was even 10 years ago or 15 years ago. I think while it evolves, it's not going to go away for as long as we have technology on which we are dependent about each other, but also on the technology itself. So I don't see cybersecurity going away. I see people becoming more aware of the risks. I see people realizing it's really under their control, and that it becomes less about a crisis and more about an everyday assurance that all steps are being taken and that it's well within our control.
So let's talk just a little bit more about the darknet, because we know that all these hackers and criminals, they are mostly around in the darknet and working from there, and even this new Bitcoin, not new, but if you want to pay with Bitcoins, you have to have an access to darknet. On the other hand, the darknet is also a possibility in dictatorship to access to information that otherwise you wouldn't get. So how do you deal with this dilemma?
Most people aren't even aware of what the dark web is and what is being sold or traded or bought in those locations. And to me, it's perhaps less relevant. It sounds sexier than talking about your everyday internet-based issues. But the reality is that what's going on there is less important than our behavior online at this point, for me, in terms of what your average person on the street needs to be thinking about and caring about. So from that perspective, while it's important to be aware that there is a black market, if you will, where goods are being sold and traded, and those goods tend to be your personal data, it tends to be your credit card data, it tends to be arms, drugs, you name it, all the illicit activity is taking place there. That doesn't mean that I need to stay up at night thinking about that. What I need to be thinking about is how to get there in the first place. It got there in the first place because of exploitations of my everyday internet and my everyday dependencies and links to technology. and the companies that have that.
You were telling us so many fascinating things, but just one last message to our user from your expertise.
The most important thing to remember when it comes to cybersecurity is that it's very much about a human issue. It's not about a technology issue. It's not even about a business risk. I hear that a lot. What it's coming down to is the human beings that are trying to do something that they're not supposed to do in order to take information, in order to take data, in order to impact a system in a way that they're not supposed to do. The other piece of that are the human beings that are going to be impacted by that, whether it's the loss of that data, whether it is the impact on the services they dependent on. But then the third piece to me are the human beings that need to be in the middle, that need to help shape the response, to be able to both protect the people who might be impacted, but also then to be able to respond in a way that's clear, that's transparent, and that really takes into consideration the trust that's been placed in them.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your time
Thank you for
and
your
your
time,
work.
Pam. Thank you again.
Thank you.